Yeah, I mean, it's just Luke Ford and the dangers of e-personality. And he's an introvert, incel or whatever. And when he comes out on the internet, he has this, like the dark side of his subconscious becomes conscious. I mean, to me, it's obvious. That's what happens. It's what's happening to you on the same way. But your unconscious, your subconscious is different than Gandalf's subconscious.
Logic and science dictate that not only consciousness doesn't exist, consciousness is in fact scientifically impossible. And yes, it is going to involve math and calculus and science and computer programming. I'm sorry. And that have different implications of the process with the connection between the levels of a person's soul and how it reincarnates.
But I'm not going to spurge on the issue because I'm not a woman. It's not my issue.
About how one day you're going to fulfill the Canadian dream and the American dream. So you watch Seinfeld and say, I could do it. I'm going to go out tomorrow and go to work and have a great day, and I'm going to be successful. And one day I'm going to have my own apartment. I'm going to have my own parties with my own friends over, and I'm going to have my own possessions. I'm going to see things that I want and just buy them.
Yeah, but that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of yours.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Weekly Review with the one and only Doooovid. I'm your host, Jen Church. Eventually, be happy to be here this weekend, hour early due to a minor scheduling conflict and something that came up at the last second. Thank you so much, Doooovid, for being open to rescheduling a little bit early. I'll hand it over to you for the introductions. Thanks for being with us here again this Sunday.
Okay, yeah, great, Jennifer. Good to be back. Hope everyone had a good week. Is your 8 o'clock stream going to be live, or it's just going to be private in Discord?
It's going to be live on this channel, so I will have to run and set that up right at 8 o'clock, but then we'll be going live with the Steve McRae AMA from the Philosophical Plebeians Discord server.
Okay, we can even end by 7:45, whatever you want. We don't have to go till 8. So let me do a screen share immediately again this week because I opened up all the links that I wanted to share. So not a particularly eventful week. Maybe it popped on Ralph. I think we're going to stop going on Ralph's. Kind of just kind of like Claire, just like panels, like uncontrolled conversations. And it's not so interesting to talk with anonymous people and yell and like expertise. Like you can't really establish expertise as a non-internet personality. So, but the regular Charles Moskowitz, and I have some streams scheduled for next week. I hadn't been streaming in a while, so I reached out and I have some new streams that I should be.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the one. I think it's tomorrow. Is that right?
Yes, I'll show that in a minute.
Awesome.
So just some random links. I only watched a tiny bit of this. This is just like a random undergraduate college course on emotions, philosophy of emotions. It was a little too basic. A lot of conversational talking between students, like a internet breakout session. But it's a whole college course on the philosophy of emotions. Found this at the beginning of a week. It was a little bit interesting. A connection of paranormal and ecology. So, but the video on the channel's Public Parapsychology, only 22 subs. Just random found it searching, and but it was a little bit interesting. He gives a nice history of the paranormal experience, like alien abduction and drug use, and he connects it to the history of biodiversity and ecology. So pretty small channel there, but give it a little boost if you want. Give it a check. Only got a handful of views. They also did a video on his gay alive, subtle activism, spiritual ethical considerations, kind of like quasi spiritual science stuff. Here was a collection of famous physicists talking about the cosmological argument. Last week we talked quite a bit about the teleological argument, and the teleological argument is um, somewhat the source for the cosmological argument also. And so just a compilation of physicists talking about the Islamic version of the Kalam version of the cosmological argument. Um, Adam Green had a big guest, Joe Atwill, the author of Caesar's Messiah, who claims that Jesus was possibly not even a historical figure, and Christianity was made up by the Romans, and that Jesus, at least parts of the gospel, models of the Roman Caesar, specifically the parts where it talks about the Son of Man, as opposed to Adam's theory, where he also says that Jesus was not actually historical and was a psyop of the Jews. So they had an interesting conversation. It was actually set up by Doooovid and Claire Call. That Claire Call, I guess Atwill's in London, landed Atwill on her channel for Chronule as a guest, and he's a pretty big name. So I was on Adam Green. That was during Claire's thing, so I mentioned that, and Claire gave me his email that I gave to Adam, and Adam was able to set up an interview with Joe Atwill, and you mentioned towards the end he thanks Doovid and Church of Entropy, and I think that was just a mistake on his part, because I said it was Claire Caw. She was in the chat, but Adam probably never heard of Claire Caw, even though she's been messaging and bugging to get on the show, and he probably thought it was you just because he remembered that I streamed with you. I think he popped into Week in Review, once or twice, so he just made the mistake of said thanks Doovid and Church of Entropy instead of Claire Caw. But it was an interesting view. I think Adam also is going to have Richard Carrier on soon, talking more about the historical Jesus who was on Modern Day Debate. So good for Adam, going more, just historical Jesus, origins of Christianity, and moving up, getting actual scholars and authors. I found this, the Galileo Galilei Institute had some sort of symposium about the Standard Model and quantum physics, and so I had a whole bunch of speakers. I didn't end up watching it. It's kind of like whiteboard lectures, but a lot of stuff on the current Standard Model of quantum physics. I've been watching these Grossbergian, Stephen Grossberg, the Resonant Consciousness. So this guy out of Boston University has an online course going over Grossberg's new book, Resident Mind, Constant Brain, that I bought. And so I asked him if he'd do an interview. So he said maybe. So I emailed him just yesterday. We'll see if he responds. But pretty in-depth neuroscience from and he has. I didn't get to the last lecture. Is actually an interview with Stephen Grossberg. So we'll see if this Johan John from India, I guess or Boston, responds. And he shared with me an article that he had published on why some neuroscientists call consciousness the C word, where he doesn't think that physicalism will solve the hard problem of consciousness. So, but the Stephen Grossberg's resonant mind is a mechanistic non-quantum theory of consciousness that in theory would solve the hard problem of consciousness. So I guess his research assistant is not so sure, but so we'll see if he responds. But those Grossbergian lectures are pretty good stuff if someone wants a more in-depth view of the science. So tomorrow night, let me share these first. So this was random, University of California, talking about engineered tissue, and it was just interesting, some of the geometry, and I guess the geometry of torus knots in terms of veins and blood vessels, and the nature of how these things form around each other. So it made me think of Jennifer's figure eight, and but so this was showing the geometry of various tissue in the human body, and then the geometry of like synthetic tissue. So it was kind of interesting in general, but I specifically thought I'd share this because I thought some of the geometries were similar to what Jennifer's showing, like the Thad Roberts stuff. I showed this last week. So the James Webb satellite tomorrow should reach the L2 Lagrange point 2 insertion point. It's been over a month. I shared the video before it was launched. It's been launched over a month now, and it's only 12,500 miles away from the final orbit. It has traveled close to 900,000 miles, and tomorrow it should reach Lagrange point 2, which Euler actually discovered Lagrange point 1 and 2, and then Lagrange, as I showed a few weeks ago, showed that there were 5 Lagrange points that would be stationary, that if you reached an object into that place between the sun and the earth, that it would stay in the same place due to a balance of force of gravitational forces. That was solved by Euler just by plugging it into the Newtonian equations and setting to 0, although Euler only solved for 2, Lagrange solved for 5. So you go back a few weeks and I go over the proof of that. But tomorrow will be the date that the James Webb satellite reaches Lagrange point 2. So I could have some streams lined up. So tomorrow morning, this guy met me on Zobita's channel, and he's been messaging me on Discord. He doesn't seem so together, but if you're to talk to him, guy in Safar in India, and he scheduled this for 6:30 in the morning. So
a discombobulated person on Discord? Well, I never.
Well, he was on. He messaged me on Discord. He was on Zobita's channel, so he has his own YouTube channel. But like he wasn't quick with his returning messages. He kept on sending me invites. So I told him to make a channel. So he wants to discuss reincarnation, and I described from the Judaic point of view. And he's in India. And I didn't know India has, like, their time difference is 10 and a half hours.
They only have one time zone too.
Yeah, so I didn't realize that India, the time zones, but so we'll see if he's around tomorrow morning. I don't think I'll be up at 6:30, but if he does, we could I'll talk with him about reincarnation. Hopefully we'll be able to push it back a few hours. So I reached out to Ashish Dalia of Shabda Media, who's written all these books on Vedic science, cosmology, and consciousness. I'll show behind me once I end the screen share.
Shabda means testimony, for those of you who are curious.
Yeah, so that'll be tomorrow night at 11, which is 9:30 in India. So it'll be Tuesday morning in India, or like down under, and in America 11 p.m. So I messaged him. I commented on one of his videos. He only has a few hundred. I talked to Jennifer a few weeks ago about reaching out to him. So I asked him if he did interviews. So we started talking, and he agreed to it. So tomorrow night we'll be talking. So I'm looking forward to that. I'll show you. I own 8 of his books. He has some interesting videos. So this is his channel, Shabda Media, and so he only has 300 some subs. He did a series of a podcast, and then he has if you were going to watch these, I would recommend these talks that he gave at an Indian Institute of Spirituality. I guess he gave 5 of them on Introduction to Vedic Cosmology, the Science of Matter and Vedic Philosophy, Sankhya and Science. Sankhya means number, everything is soul, and 3 aspects of the soul. So those are kind of like all hour videos with PowerPoints. And then he has some shorter videos that just go over concepts. So you could see he's written 18 books, which I own 8 of them, half of them. So looking forward to that. Anybody's around, if Jennifer's around, maybe I'll bring her on for a later program. We'll talk about some of this. So and also hopefully next week, Sunday, also, I shared this last week, this American Decay, the Modern Frontiersman, who are abandoning, mostly abandoned, decayed sites around America, but they have a bunch of them in Michigan. So I'm not sure if some of them are from Michigan. There's one of them, I'm not sure, Caleb, I'm not sure which one of them um, is maybe from my area. So I think next week, Sunday, I put it for 2 o'clock, but I'm not sure. He said Sunday worked best for him. So, that should be interesting. And we'll talk about the current state of infrastructure in America. And he's not an engineer; he's just a urban a modern frontiersman in American decay. But I watched all of his videos in Michigan, so that should be pretty interesting. Some civil engineering stuff. So those are the things to share. I thought I'd chant quickly. I mentioned last week I chanted the Logical song. I guess Jennifer had heard like they made some like techno dance music. Some guy Scooter from the Logical song. I think it came out in 1979, Supertramp, and the Scooter version just had like one line of it. The when I was young, it seemed that life was so. But so Jennifer was semi-familiar with the remake of the song. Um, I did chants for it. I'll probably go back to chants pretty soon. I'll have to think about it. But to see like modern song making, chanting is more serious. Popular music is a little bit more lighthearted. Um, but so I did the Alan Parsons "Eye in the Sky." So Supertramp, I thought on the same album, Breakfast in America, they had the Logical song, had a song I also like called Goodbye Stranger, and just got the solid song making, kind of like the Beatles, um, classic, chorus, refrain, um, basic song making. It's got a, a falsetto chorus, so the chorus in falsetto. So I'm going to attempt to sing this. So my phone's going off. 1 second.
Please remain calm and comfortable in
It's
your seat.
Deshaun. I'll call him back later. Okay, so you there, Jennifer?
I'm still here. Go ahead.
Okay, so this pretty good song, like a karaoke. If I did karaoke, I would consider doing this song. If Nicholas Petraeus shows up, he could probably um, play the piano. Like if the Church of Entropists ever meet up, maybe in Montreal, have Nick will whip out a piano and do some karaoke. So just kind of positivistic lyrics that you don't really see so much in modern music, and because music kind of represents the spirit of the times. So this is like after the hippie era, and early morning yesterday, I was up before the dawn, and I really have enjoyed my stay, but I must be moving on. Like a king without a castle, like a queen without a throne, I'm an early morning lover, and I must be moving on. Now I believe in what you say, it's undisputed truth. But I have to have things my own way to keep me in my youth. Like a ship without an anchor, like a slave without a chain. Just the thought of those sweet ladies sends a shiver through my veins. And I will go on shining, shining like brand new. I'll never look behind me, my troubles will be few. Goodbye, stranger, it's been nice. Hope you find your paradise. Try to see your point of view. Hope your dreams will all come true. Goodbye, Mary. Goodbye, Jane. Will we ever meet again? Feel no sorrow, feel no shame. Come tomorrow, feel no pain. Tough to do that falsetto. I used to smoke weed. I used to chant more. I would smoke weed. I think that helped me sing. So I'm not going to do the second verse, but it's kind of like a positivistic, well written, structured song. Maybe at like I'll chant this other one real quick. Also, Child of Vision. There was also like a very. This one has a very good keyboard solo, like synthesizer. So if Nick comes later and checks that out, um, Child of Vision as like a doom doom doo doom doo 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 doom doom doo doom doo 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 doo. So this music really doesn't kind of exist anymore, and I was talking last week of the transition from like the 60s to the 70s, where you had the end of the hippie era and the idealism to kind of like a existential angst. And in the 80s, then you move into metal and more a return to like violent and unhappiness of probably the 60s. Um, this is a pretty cute song. My brother, when he used to play chess, used to listen to this in headphones, and in the chorus here, it had like a father and son arguing. So I thought it was related to Jennifer's stream of this guy going through a breakdown. Well, who you think you're fooling? You say you're having fun, but you're busy going nowhere, just lying in the sun. You tried to be a hero, commit the perfect crime, but the dollar got you dancing, and you're running out of time, and you're messing up the water, and you're rolling in the wine, and you're poisoning your body, and you're poisoning your mind, and you gave me Coca-Cola 'cause you said it tasted good, and you watched the television 'cause it tells you that you should. Kind of silly lyrics, but the tune's actually pretty good. And so in the chorus, they would have two different people. The lead singer, Hodgins, I think is British Irish, had this really high voice, so it'd have like a lower voice to have like an adult child arguing back and forth. Oh, how can you live in this way? Why do you think it's so strange? You must have something to say. Tell me why I should change. There must be more to this life. There must. It's time we did something right. I said, child of vision, won't you find a new ambition? I've heard it all before. You say you're nothing new. So it goes on. So, I'm going to go back to religious chants, but I thought I'd do just to show kind of like the song structure of regular music in the 60s, 70s, really to the God word and the change of how music kind of changed recently and doesn't exist like it did uh, before. In
Did you ever see a show called Metalocalypse?
No, I don't think so.
Do you like death metal at all?
I don't listen to music anymore.
I don't listen to much music myself either, but that show is awesome.
Only
and the music
chanting.
is kind of awesome too.
I remember this music when I was younger. So like in high school, I listened to this album, probably even tens, maybe. Like there were a few albums I liked. Um, Maybe next week I'll do a little Frank Zappa, interesting character, kind of dark humor, like Pink Floyd, The Wall. So this I remember from as a kid. So let me show some of these books.
How very
So I showed
exciting.
these to Jennifer. I think when I first bought them, when I first found them, and I was looking for anything I could find about Vedic cosmology, and I came across this author Ashish Dallela, and he's not an ISKCON devotee, but he said he was inspired by Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, ISKCON, and he's an engineer. He writes that he had um, his father wanted him to go be an engineer, and he took more interest in the mystical side of things, and but he studied engineering. He has a very good grasp of science and also the Vedas, and he's not technically like ISKCON, but he took his inspiration from Prabhupada in terms of not rejecting the Vedas and the Vedic explanations of science, and how Prabhupada recruited scientist and the temple of the Vedic planetarium. So here he wrote a book called Gödel's Mistake. I showed this to Jennifer. So we'll talk about that hopefully tomorrow, where he agrees with Jennifer and more Eastern approach and the problems with Gödel's interpretation of Westernism. Here, emotion, cognition, a soul-based theory of the origins and mechanisms. So in Vedic science, there's no separation of mind, emotion, and matter. The Vedic sciences explain everything in like a unification theory, as opposed to modern
It's
science.
non-dualism, right? That's what you're describing.
Yes, I mean Galileo, when he started basically the foundations of Western science and arithmetic, discovering the relations between velocity and acceleration, the inverse, the square property between acceleration and velocity that later is codified by Newton, and Galileo basically tables mind, and so is looking at pure predictable relations of moving objects that eventually come to the laws of physics that codified in Newton and the conservation principles. And our perception, later Einstein and like relativity brings somewhat perception, but basically mind is irrelevant to science. And you have Descartes and Cartesian dualism, which is you're just saying science deals with the physical, and mind and the mind's perception of what's going on is largely irrelevant to the physical explanation. So in the West, you largely had dualistic understandings of Judeo-Christianity, were dualistic, where you had two separate realms that were basically concurrently running separately: the spiritual realm of mind and the physical realm of matter, that are running connectedly but concurrently, as opposed to the Vedics. There's a whole bunch of schools, but maybe more monistic. So here's another book, Sankhya and Science, which deals with the concept of number. Here's Mystic Universe, an introduction to Vedic cosmology. Here's Cosmic Theogony, which is the Hindu trinity of Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahman, relation to namely cognition, emotion, and the relations. Here's a book on quantum meaning, semantic interpretation of quantum theory. Another book, Time and Consciousness, about the nature of time. And then a recent book he wrote, The Yellow Pill, that deals more with the ills of modern society related to economics. So those are 8 books. He's actually written 16 books. So 11 o'clock tomorrow, Indian Standard Time. I guess they'll be 9:30 in the morning in India. And so I look forward to speaking with Ashish. And, we'll go over his body of the work, and we'll talk about, the Vedic understanding of science. And, he has a much more technical, clear understanding than Jennifer. So Jennifer might largely be saying the same thing.
He has a technical, more clear understanding than me. I can't wait.
Well, I'm saying that he knows the Sanskrit terms.
He's not
terminology.
intentionally obfuscating, is what you're
Well,
saying.
he's written. Well, I'm saying he's a prolific author. He's been studying this. He knows the Sanskrit. He knows, he's been thinking about it and its comparison, and he's created a clear lexicon to describe it. So Jennifer, problematic from her perspective is she doesn't have a common lexicon to explain her ideas. So what she understands.
I actually do. It's quantum mechanics and physics and such.
But
I'm using science.
But I'm saying from a Vedic view, where it's saying that physics only explains the physical, as opposed to Vedic science that also explains mind, space, and other
the model. In the model, everything arises from one thing. because it's not dualism. I actually have my Ayurvedic textbook out, which explains it pretty quickly. So I could probably screen share a picture of the arising model at some point during the show if people are interested, which I am.
So what I've found in the English language, that this man Ashish Dalila is the most prolific author. I randomly just found his books doing an internet search on Amazon for Vedic cosmology, and he's been pumping out books. His YouTube page doesn't have that many views, so thank God. I reached out to him, so I'm looking forward to speaking with him. I shared his YouTube page, and my link is, so if anyone wants to watch preparatory some of his videos for that tomorrow, should be good. So I'm looking forward to that, and hopefully I'm going to start interviewing people again. And I'm getting kind of tired of just going nowhere, talking to Anons. I don't really want to argue with Anons or even talk to Anons. So
Well,
I don't
when
mind
someone's
talking.
just bringing you on to be like a punchline, it does get old pretty quick. It's much
I
better
don't mind
to
talking to
have
Anons, but
conversations.
yeah, I mean, like 2 years later, I'm still talking to Anon. Like, I don't need imaginary friends. And like, if someone okay, it might have people have reasons to be anonymous, but like, you can't have a long-term relationship with someone anonymous. And it's kind of like, well, I'm a racist, and or my ideas are too like, I'm scared that bad things will happen to me if people find out that I'm connected to the ideas. They said, do I really want to have a long-term relation with some of these people? I don't mind if they view or whatever, but so like so I grow the platform, and so I just started reaching out to people, and thank God I reached out to 3 people so far. 2 have said yes, whether Johann John from the Grossberg from neuroscience at Boston University says yes. He's actually a professor or assistant professor at Boston University. So, but he did reply. So, so as of now, I'm 2 out of 3, and maybe I'll hit 3 out of 3 for the people I reached out to speak to. So I'm happy about that.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Sounds like things are turning around, and that's great. I really
I
enjoyed
actually
my.
messaged on a few more and didn't get a response from another another channel that did um, urban exploring, and that guy Robbins, who's been doing the Berks and stuff. So I've actually messaged a few times asking if he does interviews on his YouTube. So he didn't respond, but I just commented on his YouTube.
All right, I am getting very close, knock wood, to being able to upload this image. Did you have anything else to
Nope.
go into?
So that's my week in review and my shares, and so the highlight. So tomorrow morning, I'll share on Twitter and Discord if I end up speaking to this guy in India about reincarnation. If people want to check that out, be on his channel tomorrow night on 11, my channel Sunday. Also, Paul Riticelli texted me, and he was like, he wants to book me Ryan Dawson, for Charles Moskowitz to debate. And he said he emailed Ryan Dawson, and he said he'd do it. He'd go on Charles Moskowitz. I texted Charles on Friday. He didn't reply. But yeah, it could be Ryan Dawson. Call him the conspiracy theorist, the anti-Israel activist. Will be on Charles Moskowitz Thursday night. That's unconfirmed, but that's also possible. And so we'll see about that.
I've got a model up on screen. I can read from my text about Sankhya.
Yes, you got the Purusha, Prakruti, Mahad, Amkara, Tamas, Sattva, Rajas.
Yeah, so what would be familiar, I guess, would be the tamasic modes of the cosmic ego, Ahankara. Those would be familiar. I sort of hesitate to talk about a lot of these topics. I mean, Lord knows how much trouble I've gotten into just going into the ether thing. I'm still getting bullshit off that. This is even going to be way more controversial, so that's why you're not going to hear me talk about this stuff much unless someone's already interested in the topic. This is medical discipline called Ayurveda. Anyway,
Yeah, I mean, like the
agree.
Kabbalah, this is generic Hinduism that almost anyone, you might have slightly different take on it, but like, relatively almost any Hindu from any, sect would largely agree about this. So, although, if you were more scholarly, you might know, the origins and verses and where this comes from. But you're kind of like Kabbalah that, like, I mean, there might be Jews who hear like that's not what the books say, but like, no, I mean, it is what the book says, and anyone who's read the books. So I mean, yeah, this is like generic Hinduism.
Should I read it? It's just a couple paragraphs.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just giving the precursor to
I
mention
appreciate that. Yeah.
that there's just kind of generic Hinduism, and anybody Vaishnava, Shivite, Hindu nationalist, traditionalist would largely be familiar, and whether they agree that this is the phenomenon of how the world operates and like ordained like by God that in the scriptures that or the sages that this is exactly how the material spiritual world operates, that they would be familiar like, yeah, this is kind of like Hinduism, this is what our tradition teaches.
So we're basically looking at a top-down ontology, an arising physical model. I'll read from the text here. It is Textbook of Ayurveda, Fundamental Principles, Vasant Lad, Volume 1. Sankhya, page 5. Most notable proponent of Sankhya philosophy was Kapila, one of the great rishis or enlightened seers. The word Sankhya comes from sun and Kya. Sun means truth, Kya means realize, to know, to understand. It's philosophy to discover and understand the truth of life. We will consider the following principles in detail from the diagram here. First concept is Purusha. Pur means city, Sheta means dwelling, living, existing. Purusha is that pure consciousness that exists, lives, dwells in the city of the senses. Now, city here is spelled City. The body is a city of senses, many houses that gather together to create a city. In the same way, we have many senses: auditory, tactile, optic, gustatory, olfactory, with 9 gates or openings, 7 in the head, and anal and urethral openings. There are 3 extra gates in women, nipples and vagina. Pure consciousness dwells within this city of senses. Purusha is the ultimate truth, the ultimate healing power, ultimate enlightenment, transcendental state of being and existence. Purusha is energy, and this energy is choiceless, passive awareness. It is formless, colorless, beyond attributes, and takes no part in creation. Purusha can be called pure consciousness. Prakruti is primordial will, primordial matter, creative potential. Prakruti is a form, color, attributes in the field of action. It is awareness by choice, divine will, the one who desires to become many. Universe is the child born out of the womb of Prakruti, the divine mother. Prakruti creates all forms in the universe, while Purusha is the witness to this creation. There's no matter without energy, but there can be energy without matter. Prakruti cannot exist without Purusha. However, there can be Purusha without Prakruti. Sankhya says Prakruti is creativity, the feminine energy. Within the womb of Prakruti, the whole universe is born. Therefore, Prakruti is the divine mother. Blah, blah, blah. And then we go into this creative intelligence. That's the Mahad. And finally, the cosmic ego, Hankara. Pure intelligence is the Mahad. And then the I am, or ego, which is more of a depersonalized I amness. It's sort of hard. I think this is where it really just doesn't translate anymore. It's almost like the yada, yada, yada step. So I stay away from this model largely, but this is what it looks like. Call it a top-down ontology where you get matter arising from primitive concepts in a step-by-step manner. Was that, hopefully that was a little bit interesting for people. It's pretty interesting. I really like the textbook. I have had it for a while, read it quite a while ago.
This is what I
But
was trying to
interesting.
explain to
Wow.
T-Jump. I don't think him or any of his audience got it. These kind of like models of consciousness, models of mind that come from the sages, and they're not based on the scientific method, and they don't correspond necessarily with modern science. So you could have attempts at unifying them, but largely they come from sages, probably from introspection, from great sages who a lot of them spent times in the forest or caves, and really got into the recesses of their mind to understand how the mind works. And if you're a believer, there's some sort of connection between them and the divine, and that this is some sort of divine template of how reality actually operates. But in terms of an understanding of how like a model of the mind, these are working models of the mind that if you meditate, if you do a lot of introspection, or do like mental feats, if you're intellectual, try to do things to improve your intelligence, memory ability, thinking skills. Having a model of mental or even emotional processes is extremely important. And I would assume that a lot of intellectual people have thought about models of consciousness, and they've read the great classics, and maybe they've even meditated and worked on it. And so I said, like Jennifer was showing, the generic Hindu model of, I don't call it human of mind, um, that has explanatory value. In modern times, it's not in the way that the scientific method or a materialistic understanding of mind arising from the brain would understand. Although, I mean, there are attempts to make them compatible. So maybe someone like T Jump or his audience has never seriously meditated or read the classics or tried to understand some sort of metaphysical model of the mind to realize that they're pretty good. They have a ton of explanatory power, even if they don't correspond to some sort of modern scientific view. And so that was the argument I was trying to present to T Jump and his audience. I think it went past basically all of them because they're not religiously minded people. And a concept. I mean, I tried to explain to them also that yes, they do, because even modern quasi scientific models of the mind are really remnants of ancient spiritual theories. Even like Freud and his ego, superego, and id are you basically a spiritual theory of the mind. It's not based on the brain or neuroscience, although some people think that there's correspondence between neuroscience and these various things, or like Jung or psychology, psychometrics. Most of these come from the ancients who had a dualistic understanding that mind doesn't arise from matter. And so even our current understanding of mind is more remnant of the ancient mystics than of current science. And I think that basically went straight past T Jump and his whole audience.
Well, where is he getting his information from? I mean, he always says that consciousness is emergent from the brain. I mean, that's the line. I mean, where do you go from there? There's nowhere to go. So I'm not
Well, I mean,
aware
you
of.
look at the Ayurveda. So you have a explanatory model of mind motivations. You could also be health and sickness, and various things of life outcomes. Um, that we'll say is largely unscientific. It predates the modern scientific method and is largely derived from sages who either had some sort of divine revelation or discovered this stuff largely from introspection.
I would
And
argue the doshas are quite predictive, but you have to be able to use them. You can't just look it up in a textbook. Like, you have to develop your own intuition for doshas, and once you have it, yeah, it'll work. You'll have
well,
less
because it's a
time to.
model of the mind that has predictive
It's
power,
also the body, though.
explanatory, but it's like it wasn't derived from the scientific method, and
Yeah.
they're largely unscientific from a modern understanding of science.
Well, they're scientific in the sense that there have been sages that have disagreed as to what attributes ought to constitute the doshas under various practical circumstances. So I see what you're saying, though. It's like pre-scientific in the way we understand science now. Like we don't want to anachronize to the point where we are undermining the meaning of words, right?
I mean, it's like chunking theory. Like even most psychometrics, most understandings, theories of intelligence are based on um, logical models, but we don't. The physicality of the brain. There's no evidence that the physicality of the brain actually operates according to these models. So you could have a mental cognitive model that adds up on paper, and you could even make a computer program. And to some extent, like the doshas is logical enough that you might be able to make a computer programmable model that would make predictions based on the doshas. And I haven't shared um, a research paper of people who've attempted to do that. But that's not like the current materialistic mind arising from the brain. That's not really the way that works, and there's really a huge amount of uncertainty of even how thought at all, if it arises from the brain, as almost all mainstream scientists would propose, how that would go about. And say most of the models are based on how just assuming that because the brain has neurons and electric signals that it would operate similar to a computer, even though the vast majority of the evidence is that the brain does not operate as a computer. And like obviously things like a cell phone already function better than the brain in terms of outcome. But just to have a model that intuitively, as a mental construct, makes predictions and has explanatory power for how the mind works is one of the arguments I use for the spiritual realm, to say that these mental models historically were meant to say they're not operating within the physical space of the body, they're operating in the spiritual space of the soul mind. And we have models that are explanatory and predictive about how that works, but they're explanatory and predictive based on the mind not being material. So you have material models, assuming that the brain arises from consciousness arises from the brain. We have very few models, and then you really want to understand the like eliminativist type explanations of what conscious would look like if it arises from the brain, as opposed to the explanatory power of the models of consciousness that arise from a separate spiritual realm. And that was my main argument that I was pushing forward to T-Jump, like karma, that these models of like, that Jennifer was just showing are quite predictive, have explanatory power, and are better understood as the mind not arising from the physical. So if you have an explanation that's non-physical that has better explanatory than power than a physical model, then you should go with the non-physical model, or say go that say at least it has more, recognize that the non-physical model of mind has more explanatory power than physical models of mind.
And then they would say, since they don't understand anything and don't believe in consciousness, that those models are useless because they can't penetrate them. And I would agree with them on that. On all
Well,
accounts.
they kind of
There was a
want
question
like
in chat. I just wanted to ask real quick before it sort of trails off about whether you believe in the multiverse. Don't know if you want to answer that one.
well, let me just end on the point, but they kind of want to have both, the best of both worlds, that they want to have the benefit of the explanatory powers of the models of the mind, and just assume that in their idea that the brain is going to produce consciousness like these models, and they fail to recognize that the science shows that these models of how the brain, if physical, would produce consciousness like a computer is not similar to the historic spiritual models. So they really lack the science, and they lack the history of the spirituality, and just want the best of both worlds, and are largely illogical. So I mean, if the multiverse is the multiple world hypothesis, I'm not sure I believe in it. Saying multiple truth hypothesis, there's a lot of uncertainty, and there is explanatory power I went in detail on one of my multiple truth hypothesis streams about the multiple world hypothesis, the multiverse, and what that helps explain. I've been watching these Harvard videos on the Schrodinger wave equation. Let me put the link in the chat to the Harvard physics, and they have a whole bunch of videos from the last year. I'm just catching up and watching them now on the theory of Schrodinger's wave equation. But there's certain parts of quantum mechanics and Schrodinger's equation where the equations point towards multiple things concurrently happening at the same time, and therefore the explanatory power of the multiverse solves problems that support the evidence. But I don't know, let's say believe in it. That's why I'm a proponent of the multiple truth hypothesis. And, you also have things like the holographic universe and various things that would try to explain these observed phenomenon that in terms of like a singular all material world are paradoxical and contradictory. So the current state of quantum mechanics and the wave equation, we leave it at this paradox that there's contrary evidence, most classically like with the electron slit experiments with light as a wave or a particle. But within quantum phenomenon, there's a whole bunch of paradoxes that are logically inconsistent, and why even mainstream science would come on to something like the multiverse to resolve these paradoxes.
Interesting. Thanks. Samish says that if an approach allegedly has more explanatory power, one needs to prove it. Not everybody's going to accept your evidence as proof. So you are on the right track. Sort of, I think you have to go and explore what it means to actually prove something, and what does it mean for someone to have the burden of proof, first of all? Because it seems like it's self-evident, but like most things that seem self-evident, it ain't.
What does it mean to be true?
Switch, right?
I'm saying that is something. Nothing in science is really completely true. It has explanatory power, and say like it's a law. It works in all cases. It explains everything. As saying like no, I mean almost all points in science have breakdowns at some point.
Well, that's the selling point of science, is that there's always that better theory you could potentially get. That's supposed to be the major strength of it, is that that's why they say the science is never settled, or do they say that? Oh wait, no, they say it the other way around. Oh, I guess
we'll talk about this tomorrow night. But I'm saying like the Vedas or the Kabbalah that has explanations where basically all material and spiritual phenomenon derive from the same source and possibly have the same laws that govern them, that the governing laws of the spiritual and the material realms are the same, at least according to certain schools of Vedic and Kabbalistic understanding. They're not in the same way as like modern science with theorems, laws, and formulas, and like engineering and predictions, and even thing like equations that work for engineering, like Lagrange point 2. It appears that it's going to work. Like the Webb satellite's going to reach this point, and it will be a stable orbit as the equations predicted, and everything worked out. The engineering, the equations, but from a logical point, like how true are these laws, and then the fundamental nature, and say, well, it worked. We got the satellite there, the product, the car, the device worked, and the formulas and the laws, even though there's some contradictions. And that's kind of like explanatory power in terms of engineering, that the explanatory power of science comes from engineering. And but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true.
It's just the other way around.
Well, it means that it worked.
The engineering works because of the explanatory power of science.
No, I'm saying engineering
is applied science.
As I was saying, now engineering is the explanatory power of science.
The demonstration of the explanatory power of science, perhaps?
It's not the demonstration. It is the explanatory power.
Are you saying that science comes to know what it does through engineering? I just want to make sure that's not what you're saying.
Yeah, that is what I'm saying.
Right. So that's another definitional switcheroo that is completely unprecedented. But okay.
Yeah, they're saying that I mean, they're saying that because you could use science to explain observed phenomenon, And that's somewhat explanatory power, but more explanatory power is when you can manipulate observed phenomenon. And the explanatory power meaning here's this equation, and not just that this equation will explain how the sun goes around or the earth goes around the sun, or where the planets are going to be in a future time that could be tested, but that we could manipulate this for our own good. And like, here's the satellite, and we're going to insert it in, this Lagrange point two that should be stable, and so it's a higher level of explanatory power. Of it's kind of like belief and trust that this like explaining how a bird could fly is different than making an airplane. So the explanatory power of saying like, okay, we all see birds flying. How does it work? Here's an equation. Here's how it might happen. Versus here's an equation, and and a derivative of the equation is the airplane.
I guess we're back to the whole is math a language question, ultimately.
Well, it's somewhat irrelevant whether it's a language, but it's like you could look at like words becoming potentiality.
It's about where does reality create words? If you want to really take consciousness out of it, you have to phrase it as, does reality create words?
Well, it's like a model of consciousness. So what's the value of a model of consciousness? You're saying from a religious point of view, like Kabbalistically or Vedic, it's to to be a devotee, to be a better person, to be self-realized. And by understanding a model of consciousness, we could learn what correct behavior is and align ourselves with correct behavior, because say this model of consciousness is accurate, and through understanding the model we'll be able to master ourself. And so the proof of the mastery of the model is self-mastery. And so that's like a model of consciousness, and then even to teach disciples. But the biggest demonstration of a mastery of a model of consciousness is self-mastery. So how did you master your own consciousness? And it's not just that you understood the model because you had to apply it, but the eventual demonstration will be self-mastery. And so to science, not just to explain
Won't it be
observed
someone
phenomenon,
else's judgment of self-mastery?
but it's saying engineering is the ultimate demonstration of,
Engineering.
well, it's saying so self-mastery is like internal engineering. That's like soul engineering. That the mastery of the doshas is by being self-realized, um, being enlightened. So you really understood the model because you were able to become enlightened. And so that's also not just like you could explain how phenomenon exist in the external world, but you could change your own internal world. And so too with the material sciences and engineering. So not just could I explain what I see around me, that I could manipulate what I see around me and demonstrate that these rules not just explain what I see, but these are in fact the rules of the material realm. So too that I can't just use the rules to explain what I see, but I could also use the rules to create what I see and create what you see. That, I mean, I could tell Jennifer this is how a bird flies, and maybe, oh, that makes sense. Maybe maybe it makes some predictions, but it's saying this is the nature of flight, and it doesn't just explain how a bird flies. You could demonstrate it by making our own device that will be capable of flying.
Cool.
And that's important for meditation, and like Swami, the guru is a master of the senses. You become a guru by mastering your own senses, and you teach other people to help them master their own senses. And so if you really understand the model of mind, then presumably a person would want to be in correspondence with correct behavior. And if they understood the nature of consciousness, they would have, to the best of our ability, coordinated our action and mind with the correct behavior, correct mind, and it would be tangible in our own personal results. That that's the predictive power of a spiritual model of consciousness. That this is what helped me reach enlightenment, and then I could explain it to you, and you could use the same model of mind to reach enlightenment. And it's like, oh, me and Jennifer, we're not necessarily giving over our own like self-created. This is saying like largely like any Hindu would largely agree with this. This is like the generic Hindu revealed from the scripture of the sages of the model of consciousness, the model of mind, and the path towards enlightenment.
I don't think Hindus would agree that you should be able to get enlightened from reading scripture. I think they would actually deny that, as it goes against the principle of a revelation based.
Well, I mean, you have to do the meditation and the work, but I'm saying that they would agree that if you started using it would be a shared lexicon of
They would
the
agree
guru.
that it takes initiation, probably, and
Well, they would
maturity.
agree on the lexicon of the gunas and these terminologies in the model, and so that Jennifer didn't make up
Probably,
a
yeah.
model. She
Yeah,
has
yeah.
a model that basically any Hindu would say, like, that's our model. That comes from the Vedas. Like our sages wrote about, the majority of the sages agreed to this model, and it's in the historic literature and in every temple, in every yoga class. They're basically using a similar lexicon and a similar model,
Well, I
just
don't know
like
if I go that far.
Kabbalah or something, that the tapasya or gunas or something like that
I'm
is
sorry,
common.
but I've never seen anybody do anything remotely close to tapasya. So let's
The
just throttle
lexicon,
that back.
the
Maybe the
lexicon is
lexicon, but using
universal,
words and having an
that any Hindu
understanding.
would
So
agree upon the lexicon, just like Kabbalah. Any Jew would like, yeah, that's our lexicon. These are our generally accepted sages, and this is what they wrote. So the engineering of what is enlightenment, what does it mean to be realized, or something that comes from work or from a communal form of acceptance. But it's saying you're not going to create your own lexicon. You're borrowing from an accepted Hindu lexicon that's found in the scripture, in the writing of the consensus of sages from previous generations to this generation.
yep, that would
And
it
so if
would
you said, like, no, I became enlightened and I have my own model and I'm going to create my own lexicon to describe my own unique discoveries, and then I'm going to demonstrate that by teaching other people the path, like by becoming self-enlightened and then enlightening others, and that my model
that
will be
implies I wasn't always enlightened, but go on.
well, it's saying that you didn't, that you're generally from a religious tradition, like, no, people don't come up with anything new. They tap
Well,
into what was revealed in ancient times.
did Adi Shankaracharya come up with anything new, or did he just remind people of the old classics? I mean, arguably, you could argue both sides of that, I think.
Well, it might have been modernized interpretation, but I mean, saying no, he used the common lexicon that all Hindus, would have been largely familiar with what he was talking about. He might have organized it or structured in a way that was sectarian or caused dispute, but like the terminology in the lexicon was taken from the scripture and taken from the previous sages. I mean, science works in a similar way, that you're saying, like, saying that presumably you're going to use like calculus and a formula, and you say, like, no, I'm going to have like a new completely different notation that describes things in a different way. No, it's almost all scientists use the current basis of algebra and calculus that's been canonized in the last few hundred years in the West.
Yep.
So I mean, in theory, if you could came up with a new paradigm, you say, like, forget algebra and calculus, I have a new way of describing this phenomenon, and then you would probably have to prove yourself not just through explanations of physical, like making predictions about observed phenomenon, but probably through engineering and the creation of devices, that it would be conceivable that if you could create devices that worked according to your new your terminology, that people would give up and slowly switch to yours. But I was saying it would have to be proven through engineering.
So therefore, it's basically like the engineers came up with quantum periodic tables. Is that it? Pretty much. Hey,
Well,
how's it going,
you haven't
Jason?
actually engineered anything. So it's saying your
Except the
quantum
quantum
periodic,
periodic table.
yeah, but you haven't made anything from it.
Mm.
You don't have a device. You don't have a demonstration of what you could do based on this knowledge. So even if you have like observed phenomenon that you could more correctly explain observed phenomenon or make predictions about observed phenomenon in nature, that it would take the second stronger prong of engineering devices, that for your quantum periodic table, would not, even if you could better explain observed phenomenon, that you would need to take it to the second level of your quantum periodic table being able to create new, better devices. So, like, no, I mean, you're not even close to that. Like, I don't think you even claim to have like a single device you created.
Nothing I can talk about, that's for sure.
And even if you helped, like, something that was an observed astronomical phenomenon, that's one level of the proof of science, that it would better predict observed phenomenon. But the higher level of proof is an engineered devices, not the explanation of not explanation of nature.
I just wanted to say thanks to Jason Torn in the chat there for coming on to the show. Really improved it a lot, and I just appreciate your patience, because I guess I acknowledge I'm not the easiest person in the world to work with there, but working on it. So yeah, back to my week in review.
I mean, Dark Knight is saying, like, Doovid likes to take low-key take shots at Jen. I think it's tough love. Like, no, I'm not taking a shot at her. I'm just saying, like, facts are facts. Like, if she created a device, I haven't seen one. And, like, even if her theories that possibly, and if I agreed, might explain observed phenomenon better than the current theories, like, no, I mean, that's not going to, really be a complete theory till there's a device. And, like, if she has one, I haven't seen it. And that's not a shot. It's just reality.
I haven't built any devices. That's true.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an insult. It's just a fact. I mean, like, if you want to prove me wrong, you would have to show me a device.
Well, the next thing I want to do is build a computer language with information-rich primitives. Hopefully something that can interface with a quantum computer. I guess you don't count the whole Leibnizianly equivalent photon quantum computer adjustable thing, which is indistinguishable from my own model. That doesn't count, even though that technically got built.
Yeah, but it's not like a. I mean, from you're saying, like, the current state of science, like, it'd be like, okay, is there a quote or mention of you in the paper? Is it concurrent ideas? Is there a connection between your model and say, okay, like, I don't know, like, I'm speaking to you, and it's like that. Yeah, your model has explanatory power that might appear better than current explanations. Whether your model is unique, whether other people, even saying that, but you didn't build the device.
Well, if my model's unique, that's almost a failure.
If the people did build the device, used your model and didn't quote you or didn't take, or they came up with it on parallel on their own, that's the nature of science. And but I mean, for your own, like, you could have the purpose of models is the explanatory power, and if to have things in your own head explained versus to abstractly be able to explain something that someone else could understand it, and then have the explanatory power from that, and just to understand quantum phenomenon. So is it actually what you'd call a scientific theory? Like, is it actually like a?
Are you talking about my model, or what are we talking about here?
Well, even the quantum periodic table,
it's not a theory. That is like more, you could compare it with a yantra. It's one singular thing. It's non-dual
It's more just
identity.
like a template.
A template is a good word for it. Very good. See, that's where engineers come in.
It's a template to help understand a concept. It's not even clear whether you're not really saying anything new. You're just laying it out in a different way that has benefit of understanding the phenomenon better, but it's not actually a unique new theory. It's just a laying out of the current state of knowledge in a new way.
To me, it would be a failure to not have it be integral in that sense. If it's already
the periodic table is not a scientific theory. It's just a laying out.
It's a byproduct of science.
Well, it's just like a heuristic to help people understand an idea. So, I mean, we don't.
No, it's a compilation of numerical data that allows you to make future predictions about chemical reactions, and a pattern.
The table is just
display
a table
of the organization of that table is because of shared characteristics along the columns. That's the key definitional aspect of that table.
But there's no unique scientific predictions or anything in the periodic table. Like what
the prediction is, oh, I've got some chlorine over here.
It's just
and
a
some
table
sodium
that
over
lays
here.
out the information in a useful way, but there's nothing unique about the periodic table. I mean, the concept of neutrons and mass and these various elements, that's clearly delineated in an easy way to understand and to gain the pertinent information from in the periodic table, but there's no actual theory of the periodic table. There's no law of the periodic table. The periodic table is just a table.
There you
And
go.
it's laid out in a way that helps people understand phenomenon in an easier way, but there's no unique
There's sort of a theory.
The periodic
Yes,
table
is.
doesn't make any unique predictions. The periodic table explains other scientific theories that made these predictions and lays it out in easy to understand and work and garner information from.
There's a
But
connection
absolutely
between the
no
periodic
theory of
table
there's
and
no
quantum mechanics.
there's no theory of the periodic table. It's
Yes,
just a
there
template.
are
It's just a
quantum
layout.
mechanical theories of the periodic table, and organic chemistry has to do with covalent bonding and geometric arguments.
Those are the
regards to
scientific theories,
to
not the
bond.
table. There's no scientific theory in the table. There's theories related to electron
There are theories
orbitals
about
and
the
covalent bonding and various things that are explained in an easy, visual, understandable way in the table, but there's no unique theory in the table itself.
orbitals, orbital theories. I've heard
Yeah,
them. They're
orbital
shit,
theory's
but
not-
I've heard them. I'm not saying you're
Orbital
wrong.
theory
Essentially, you're
predates
right.
the periodic table. Orbital theory is a theory, and the periodic table lays out the information of orbital theory in an intuitive, usable way. But orbital theory didn't come from the periodic table. The
Well,
periodic
yeah,
table,
I think it did in all the ways that, like, where else would it have come from?
Well, because you don't know the history of science, then, so you just put your foot in your mouth.
Well, then correct me. Where did it come from?
Well, you had a whole bunch of discoveries over a period of hundreds of years, and then the periodic table is just a template paradigm that lays out all these various discoveries in a nice, useful chart. But there is no discovery in the periodic table itself. It's a compilation of other discoveries where you have a whole bunch of discoveries put into a useful chart to gather information. But there was no discovery. No one discovered the periodic table. There's a whole bunch of discoveries about the electron and orbitals and different bonding and various factors. And then the periodic table came to lay out and explain the understanding of what's happening at in the atom. But the periodic table itself doesn't tell you anything unique about the atom. It just organizes a whole bunch of other information. Some of the quantum periodic table doesn't tell you anything unique about quantum phenomenon. It just organizes it in a intuitive way that helps a person's understanding. It doesn't actually tell you anything that wasn't previously known.
Well, yeah, I guess that means the knowledge I brought didn't come from science then? Or it's not knowledge?
It's just a template. It's knowledge, but I'm saying it's not a theory. It's nothing new. It's just an organizational...
Well, the theory is the measurement limit, and essentially saying that template is the same information as the 3 + 1 dimensions we inhabit ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, and you didn't come up with all these things were well-known phenomena.
Nobody has said that the dimensionality. Nobody has argued that I'm aware of.
Into a template that your organizational template.
I've never seen anyone argue that the periodic table is itself a space-time event template, and that it operates on the same principle of dimensional preservation as our scale. I've never heard that argument before.
Because
someone may have made it, but I'm not aware of it.
But I'm saying the table is just a table.
Sure.
It's not a theory. It's just
theories can be made about things, including tables. So it stands.
No, I mean, you don't even. I mean.
What? I guess I'm struggling to understand your point.
Well, I mean, I'm just trying to give a larger explanation of science and what, like, a model. So if you say like a model of consciousness, and you're looking at how various forces and factors interact with each other and how to organize it in easily workable structure to understand it, and And so if you're, so like that's a table. All you did, you just made a table there, and it conveys information in a neatly organized way, and that's it. That's all the table does. So, the quantum periodic table, it's just a table. It's not a law. It's not a
That
theory. It's
demonstrates
a
the
table.
law of the measurement limit. It makes the measurement limit a lot harder to deny.
But it's just a table. It's not the theory of the measurement limit. It's just a table.
It's an image that
It's
demonstrates
just a
the
table.
measurement
That's why
limit.
you're calling it a table. It's just a.
Well, I'm calling it a table out of respect.
It's just a chart. That's all it is.
Okay. What does that mean?
Well, I mean, it is what it is.
Right. So
It's not
it
like,
is. Are you saying
Newton's
it's
theory.
insufficient on its own to be a theory? And if yes, then I agree with you. It is insufficient to be a theory, and I'm not considering that a theory.
Yeah, it doesn't make any unique predictions that the current axioms that go into the table don't make without the table. It's just a way of organizing the information in an intuitive way to help understand the concept. Doesn't actually make any unique predictions that couldn't be
It
made.
predicts that there
with-
won't be any more elements past 118. It predicts that there won't be any more dimensionality plus past 3 plus 1. It does make predictions. You just have to understand how to make the
those
predictions.
aren't unique predictions of your model. Those are pre-existing predictions that your model is based off of.
I'm fine with that. I don't
Well,
need
no, it doesn't
to.
matter if you're fine with it. I'm saying these are factual. I mean, God forbid, you just make yourself sound dumb. Saying like know the history of science and know who said these things 100 years ago. So like no one needs you to like think you're so smart that anybody who's read a book would know that these predictions were well made 100 years ago, and you just compiled it in a table. You didn't come up with anything unique in your quantum periodic table. You just compiled it into an information structure, but all of the units of information already existed. You didn't create anything new. You just created a new template to compile a well-known, established phenomenon.
I'm not even sure if I'd go as far as to say the template is new, but yes. And someone in the chat's asking the 4D shape, hyperbolic figure eight, not complement, is what that's called. And you can deform it to get apple if you are filling it from the top. If you're filling it from the bottom, it comes up through the tube. So it can be filled in two different ways, essentially. And there's a blog post for that. I'll put it in the chat in a minute.
I mean, Mansour's saying like Mendeleev didn't discover the periodic table. He merely created the framework that became the modern periodic table, leaving gaps for the elements. So he's saying Jennifer, if she's like a modern day Mendeleev, she didn't discover the periodic table. She just arranged and created a framework for it. Like all these. There's no unique discovery that she made. She just laid out and arranged a framework.
Yep.
And that's why I told her. Like, I mean, my high school chemistry teacher said that the periodic table is really three-dimensional. She had like different ones that like she didn't have a model like Jennifer's, but I mean she said that in reality it's three-dimensional, and she had attempts at the three-dimensional model that weren't as good as Jennifer's, but so if anyone like who knew what the periodic table was always knew that the periodic table is really a two-dimensional representation of something three-dimensional. It could be it's even more than that. And so if Jennifer just came up with an arrangement to demonstrate that, and I'm not saying it's not like a great accomplishment. I mean, Mendeleev came up with the periodic table that's used today, but there wasn't any unique scientific discovery that went into the periodic table. It's just an arrangement to explain already accepted and known scientific discoveries.
People probably think that he's being too rough and
It's not being rough. I'm just explaining like if people
respectful
are
enough.
dumb.
But I actually dead on pretty much agree with this 100%. It makes
I'm just explaining obvious. And I mean, it's like you say people patronize you because you're a girl, and really it's kind of like, oh, you cute little retard. I was watching, that Kathy's Physics and Science, and like the female physicist, where they kind of just like roll you out as like a circus freak. They're like, oh, she's so smart, and it's really
are you sure that's not just a familiarity bias?
Well, I'm saying because people are dumb and they don't understand what you're talking about. so they think it's bigger than it actually is, and saying it's an accomplishment, good for you. But
People don't think it's bigger than it actually is. If they don't
well,
understand
because
the
they don't
context, they
understand
think
it at
it's
all, so
less. They think it's smaller than it actually is. They just see it and they say nothing.
well, it was just patronizing to say like it was like oh, she's so smart, or, something. But and it's saying people's bad karma because they don't actually understand
People saying I'm
science.
smart, now that's bad. Me having bad relations, bad. Me now getting praised being smart, also bad. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like saying like if you're rich, you're saying like he's got more money than God, or like he could, it's like no, like he's got this amount of money, he's got this amount of shares in stocks or whatever. So if you understand finance, you could say like this is so to know the nature of your accomplishment, so some sort of patronism is I mean, I don't want to say it's negative, but it's basically useless. So people don't know what you're talking about, and it's like, oh, she's really important. She came up with something big, like what it was. I have no idea, but I know it's big.
When people are introduced to stuff for the first time, they probably can't say exactly what it is. Probably.
Well, I mean, they may never understand it. They have a background to actually, and then even the history of science. And so Jennifer, unfortunately, doesn't know the history of science herself. So she can't even know the nature of her accomplishment because she hasn't done the standard scientific review of the literature and the previous accomplishments to know the nature of her accomplishments, because you have to know what has previously been done to know the nature of your accomplishment.
Or I don't care to speak on the nature of my accomplishment.
We don't even know if it's an accomplishment. I'm saying that it's possible that everything you did was already discovered and written up in journals, and saying until you try to publish or until you do that, um, you don't know. So
I just thought of Grinder when you said publish. I was reminded of publish or perish. This reminds me of someone slowly drowning.
I mean, you have like Gandalf like kissing your ass in the chat or something, but it's not going to magically like
You know
put
what
the
Krishna
history.
said
It's
is
not
one is
going to
supposed to be
magically like put the
indifferent.
history of science into your head. You have to study the history of science. You have to you have to do the due diligence and work.
Where would you say I'm missing? Where are the biggest gaps, would you say, in my, like, just all of history of science? Or
Well, I mean, you have huge gaps in general the history of science, but I'm saying like I mean even just like the history of the periodic table. Like get a book on the history of the periodic table. Like um, even just for what you're talking about, even just stuff like I searched on Google that you didn't know about. But it's saying like yeah, I mean you just like I mean maybe I'll look at I'll look at are there good like a history of the periodic table. I'm reading right now a book on I'm always reading on the history of science, but yeah, I mean it's just it's like T jump like how come you haven't won the Nobel Prize, and saying but well it could be because you're not actually saying anything new. And how come you're not published? And so well because it could be that you didn't actually you don't actually have anything published, so there's not actually anything unique. And if you put in an article that it would be seen that everything that you said has already been said.
well, it's not so much about that. It's about the clarity of the particular combination of words employed by a particular person at a particular time. Mayhaps.
Well, I mean, scientific rigor. So I mean the historical analysis is
You're
part.
talking about rigor in a historical review when the average person doesn't give a shit about history. So forgive me if I haven't launched onto that. Although I do agree that understanding history is important. It's unclear what it is. Where's the gap in my understanding here? I feel like I've been studying the history of science like I've done nothing other than that, in a way.
Well, I'm saying that I mean we since the first time we talked, I'm saying that's the nature of being published. All scientific papers start out with a historical review where you have to say what your idea is, what the great minds of previous generations have said on the topic, and how your idea fits in with the current understanding and what's unique about it. So, just saying that I don't believe you that you have anything unique. Like that. Like a T jump. You're saying like like I believe you when you're published. Like okay, you could have
Okay.
Gandalf kiss your ass all you want, but like I'm not going to believe you till you're published. And just the rigorous process like that. The skepticism is largely warranted. So okay, like I'm your friend, I'm your stream partner, I'm encouraging you, but like no, man, I would encourage the skepticism and say that someone says they have some great theory, you have to survive the rigors of publication, and that would include once you're published that someone would you doing the due diligence of your own historical review, that once you're published and it's in a journal, someone will look up and like you didn't do an accurate historical review, and actually what you're saying has already been said.
I actually think what I'm saying has already been said. It's just I don't think there's any books of it, so
So
what
you
am I
have
going
to do
to
your
do?
due diligence, and then so if you did your due diligence and you're going to publish, and say I looked and I couldn't find, and then you're published, you would say, well, you didn't look good enough because someone who read your paper looked and found, or you say you looked and didn't find, and you publish, and you're right that no one else is going to be able to look and find.
I want to present a methodology for people,
Even a methodology. So I'm saying
for anybody who wants to use it. Not, oh, you have to know all this other stuff to use it. No, anybody can use it if they, well, yeah, there is some stuff. Obviously, math is required to some extent, but there's no there's no horrible infinities in this approach.
and just kind of dumb, like you're like saying like you're like money. You're saying like how much you make. It's a number. Like what was the accomplishment? So science also, um, I mean, it's somewhat objective. Like if you have something, let's see it. If it makes predictions, do it. If it's workable, explain to somebody else and let them work with it. And if you can't,
Okay.
and if you can't, people should be skeptical. Your friends and family and loved ones might encourage you, but like no,
They don't.
people
They're
should be
probably
skeptical.
more skeptical of me than anyone else.
Yeah, and so like when you get your prize or published or your company or something, they still might be skeptical. But
I don't understand. Why would you advise skepticism?
I mean, skepticism is part of knowledge.
Okay, but so is trust and validation and authority.
Yeah, but in terms of science, new discoveries are very rare. So as I'm saying, if you're a simpleton, don't know, I mean, it kind of comes to like God forbid, the curse of learning from women, that people know so little that they can't tell if what you're telling them is something that like they would learn in college physics or something that you're making up. So you could have someone like Gandalf, and he just can't tell the difference if it's like your great mind, or if you're just telling him something that if he took a physics course that he would learn also.
Woody, you tell me. You're the one always prattling about your high school teacher telling you the periodic table was three-dimensional, as if that means something.
Well, I say like if I'm explaining to something, explain like you would like had you taken this course in college, you would have learned this. It's part of understanding curriculum, and in chunking theory, understanding the structure and organization of knowledge, and comparable, like saying that if you were in a physics program, that you would take this courses and they would structure the knowledge in this way, and then if you're structuring it a different way, and that's why I say like yeah, if you got a master's in physics, you would probably have to teach or TA an undergraduate course and go through the rigors of teaching physics to undergraduates. That because that's the how your knowledge gets structured and organized, that you would have to TA undergraduate physics courses and teach hundreds of undergraduates these ideas, and then that would provide you with your mastery, and that you couldn't get a master's degree or a PhD without doing that. It's part of the process.
True.
So then you're just saying something like saying like like no, like I tutored calculus and physics, and it's saying like this is what you learn in calculus 1, 2, 3, or 4, physics this, and if you were that I'm just telling you, and to differentiate what you're saying, what's unique of your take on it versus what is largely canonized. And so you haven't went through the process, and and so having not went through the process, you lack that ability. So I mean, you may online be able to speak to people, but like no, I mean, if you went back and got a master's degree, you would have to TA an
Then I
undergraduate
would
class.
finally win an argument against the skeptics. Why didn't I think of that?
Well, people are. It's good to be skeptical. You can't necessarily
You
win
can
an
keep
argument.
saying that till the end of time, but to be skeptical against something obvious is actually highly mid-witted.
I mean, you can. I mean, I say that all the time. People giving me advice on that I give advice to. That Paul Richard Shelley's in the chat, so I'm not sure if Ryan Dawson, if he booked that. I texted Charles Friday. He didn't text me back, so I don't know if it's finalized the time or anything. But it's saying you demonstrate it, and you could say that like when I'm telling you, like like your average Orthodox rabbi isn't going to argue with this. Like if I'm telling you something that I know your average Orthodox rabbi would argue with or might not agree with, versus things that like no, I'm convinced that like I'm certain that any Orthodox rabbi is going to or physics, like any physics professor is going to agree with this point. And then if you're saying something that goes against the canonization, that I mean, skepticism is a trait that can't necessarily be dispelled, but evidence and understanding of canonization and procedure and process and like chunking theory of how information is put together is really the best you could do. And then so if you want to stroke your ego, and that's what I said about the Mason versus the magician, that you go to the lodge and learn a trick, and then you go out into the countryside and you perform a magic act, and everybody's like, oh, he's a magician. He's like, no, you just performed a trick they taught you in the lodge, but the plebs in the countryside have no idea what you're doing, so they think you're great. So it's like no, I mean, Jennifer's just like an average person with an undergraduate degree in physics, but the people watching your show know so little about it that you're like a magician to them. And then so it's saying like, well, so can you explain the difference between like no, this is just like undergraduate physics, what any person who took a few physics courses would be expected to know, versus what you're saying that's unique or that might be disagreed with or debated in the Institute of Experts. And so you're better to dispel skepticism by being clear about that.
Are
And
you
so
an
just
expert in
the ego to just
dispersal of
like
skepticism, though? That's what I want to know.
I mean, just to like be a magician, be like, oh, like these plebs think I'm like a god, when really I'm just a person with an undergraduate degree in physics, and these plebs are such plebs that they can't tell the difference between a god and someone with an undergraduate degree in physics.
Then how come I was perceived so awesomely prior to my degree, Doooovid?
Well, because you can't tell the difference between flattery or whatever.
Flattery and what? Worship?
Well, I'm saying that whatever. I'm saying like results are results. I was saying like that non-experts, what non-experts thinks doesn't doesn't really matter.
And there are some domains where who is an expert is unclear, and will probably always be unclear for all time.
Well, if there's a
like you
department
said, the
in a
best we can do is to
university,
delineate the difference between those
you
domains.
could disagree with, like if it's like a rabbinic, there's an ordination process, there's universities, there's departments of it, and you could disagree with their organizations of expertise, but like no, there's currently physics departments and there's currently curriculum that and there's a recognized hierarchy of expertise. So if you have a model that goes against the recognized hierarchy, then then you should at least understand the internal uh, accepted organization of hierarchy of expertise and why you think that's incorrect. And just by having a bunch of plebs that worship you means nothing. It's like Eric Weinstein, something like you millions of viewers who know nothing that thinks he's great, but in the institute, no one thinks he's great.
Yeah, good point. Are you comparing me to Eric Weinstein, though?
Well, yeah.
He's kind of like a super spy James Bond character.
Well, I mean, God forbid, it's like even like Jeffrey Epstein. Saying like fooling, God forbid, like tricking girls out of their sexual favors, doesn't mean that there's respect in the institute. And saying like you just did some tricks to like God forbid, like garner some sort of pride, some sort of unrelated ego material benefit. It has nothing to do with the actual expertise recognized on the topic. As I said, like the theory should be accepted among the experts, and that you can convince a bunch of plebs that don't understand anything could provide you benefit and prestige, but that it's not going to garner acceptance in the institute. That's like T-jump is like so where's your Nobel Prize? Where's your paper?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and so just like, well, look at my worshiper, look at all the plebs that worship me. And it's like, well,
if I wanted an
plebs worshiping you.
entourage, I would have already
I don't
had
care
one
how
when
many
we
plebs
met.
worship you. Like, what does that prove? I mean, it proves, okay, it's an accomplishment to have plebs worship.
Where's your entourage of plebs? Just saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, so okay, like, well, at least I got plebs worshiping me, but it doesn't
You do
mean
have an entourage of plebs, from what I can see in the chat. More people are admiring you than me, so you're sort of like sinking your own boat there. I feel. Is this like
I
the
don't,
dreaded
like Lord
fear
Chaitanya.
of success that I keep hearing about?
I have no desire for followers, no desire for beautiful women, followers, fame, or glory. Like, no, I'm not doing this for followers. I'm not doing this for plebs. Saying like I would rather have people demonstrate that they're actually paying attention to what I'm saying by having their own self-mastery.
And admiration is a great accelerant for that. The way alcohol is a social lubricant, as they say.
Okay, so we'll try to wrap up so you could do your 8 o'clock. So let me mention a few points on being there for people in their time of need. The Talmud mentions, the businessman speaks to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, I basically do what you do. I buy low and sell high. The nature of all business essentially is buying low and selling high. And so that, the rabbi said, I do deeds in this world that are very easy, and the reward in the world to come is very large. And so being there for people in their time of need is kind of the basis of loyalty and friendship. And to a lot of extent, it's pretty easy that, that saying that a person in their time of need needs a little bit of help. And a lot of times it's something small, like, a ride, borrowing a little bit of money, favor, a friendly word, and the reward for being there in the time of person's need could be large. So Jennifer's got her stream, supposedly persons in their time of need. And, so it's important. Loyalty is largely demonstrated irrationally, where really the only way to demonstrate loyalty is to be loyal to a person when logic would dictate that you shouldn't be loyal to them. I mean, to say to let someone borrow money when chances are they're not going to be able to pay you back, to give a person a chance when they really don't deserve a chance, so to say. That if you do a person, like a favor that isn't really a big favor, that logic would dictate, like, okay, you're going to be rewarded for it, you're going to get paid back, or you're going to get paid back with interest, or I'm going to make it up to you. But when you help a person out in a way where you don't, it's unlikely you're ever going to get paid back. Like in Hebrew, chesed shel emes, true kindness is specifically to the kindness to the dead, because the dead could never pay you back, or at least only spiritually or metaphysically. But doing like burying the dead or cleaning up the karma of somebody that's dead is a true kindness, because there's no way in any regular material terms you'll ever be paid back. So I agreed to stream early with Jennifer this week, and we'll wrap up in order that Jennifer could do her other stream with this person who's supposedly in their time of need. And sometimes it said being there for someone in their time of need doesn't necessarily, like, sometimes it is a big hit on you to be there for a person in the time of need. And could be a big hit on you if you don't have much money and a person needs to, borrow a sizable sum of money that you can't afford to lose, or, like something that could ruin your friendships or relations, and you really stick it out there to give a person a chance. But a lot of times, most cases, being there for a person in their time of need is just recognize this person really needs help that much right now. It's not that sweat off my back to take a little bit of inconvenience to help them up. So if there's anything else you want to say, otherwise we could wrap up so you could prepare for your next stream.
Yeah, I do appreciate you starting an hour early, and I thought it was an awesome stream, and appreciate the feedback. And we'll, I guess I'll just shove what I had for this week till next week. It's probably all for the best because I need to get my ideas surrounding it more clear anyway. So come on back here in about 15 minutes for another stream, which as far as I can tell is still happening, but you never know. So always have that element of mystery. And apologies in advance if it doesn't happen. And we'll see you next Sunday if not sooner. But check out Doooovid's channel. What time is that again? 9 a.m. Or actually, wait, your chat with the Indian fellow.
11 p.m. tomorrow night, and he's in India, so it's in the morning, Tuesday morning in India. And American Decay, the guy just messaged me back. So 2 p.m. next week, Sunday, I'm going to have the guy from American Decay talking about the current state of infrastructure in Michigan. And if Paul hooks it up, we'll have on Charles Moskowitz, Ryan Dawson this week. So hopefully Jennifer's program. So pop back to her channel in a few minutes for her AMA with someone from the philosophy server. Encourage Jennifer to do more streaming, and we'll be back next week grinding away at the science and the battlefield of ideas. So have a great week, everyone.
Thanks again, dude. We'll talk to you next Sunday. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of.
It's so important that she can't be told, she won't be told that it's wrong. And
bringing it back to Church of Entropy and her attack dog Gandalf the White.
Why don't you learn to shut up and fuck goddamn logic?
they control the media, and the media is capable of making the sheeple believe in anything.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, we've had these streams, and I've been doing with Church of Entropy, and she's been bringing on new people, and like we did those streams on like stream etiquette. We walked through like the technology.
I have like very strongly negative opinions of the kind of Brundle clique.
Is she trying to garner herself cult prestige by associating herself with a retard?